From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this Mother's Day weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. More severe weather and more tornadoes tore across the U.S. That's after a record-setting April.
This will rank as the number 2 all-time. The only year we saw more U.S. tornadoes was the historic April 2011.
And it's the transition to La Nina that's partially to blame.
When we do move very quickly from an El Nino to a La Nina, the atmosphere gets really confused.
But the tail end of El Nino is also bringing historic flooding to Brazil, causing widespread damages to their crops. And in Ukraine, the war drags on. 85,000 pieces of farm equipment have been destroyed.
Landmines are a significant issue across the country in terms of affecting agriculture, and of course that affects the economy.
From the front lines to the farms, it's a boots on the ground look at the devastation in Ukraine.
U.S. Farm Report, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when the name on a cap matches the power of one's purpose. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Now for the news, how many bushels of corn, soybeans, and wheat will farmers produce this year? USDA providing its first estimate of the growing season. Let's start off with USDA's projection for the 2024-2025 U.S. crop being planted right now. USDA projecting a smaller corn crop compared to last year. Even with the trendline yield penciled in at 181 bushels per acre, it's fewer corn acres that's causing a lower production picture, with USDA penciling in a 14.86 billion bushel crop. USDA projecting a larger soybean crop in the U.S., though, with a projected soybean yield of 52 bushels per acre. Production is forecast to reach 4.45 billion bushels. That's up considerably from last year's crop size of 4.165 billion bushels. USDA pegging 2024-2025 corn stocks at 2.102 billion, soybeans projected at 445 million bushels, and wheat is forecast at 766 million bushels. Both corn and wheat came in below trade expectations. Soybeans were above. And after the flooding in Brazil, there's a lot of talk about the impact on the crop in South America. USDA did cut Brazil's corn crop estimate by 2 million metric tons, now at 122 million. The soybean crop in Brazil was trimmed by 1 million metric ton to 154 million. And in Argentina, USDA cutting the corn crop by 2 million metric tons to 53 million metric tons, but leaving soybeans unchanged. We'll have further discussion and take a much deeper dive into the report coming up in our roundtables. The CDC is now asking state agencies to make personal protective equipment available to farm workers following the discovery of avian flu in dairy cattle. The agency is saying in a release it's asking state health and ag departments and other partners to help coordinate the distribution of the equipment. They would like it to be made available to workers on dairy and poultry farms as well as in slaughterhouses. CDC's principal deputy director recommending states make a priority to hand out PPE to farms where cattle have already been infected. The agency continues to say the immediate risk to the public from H5N1 remains low, but it highlighted the importance of acting now to protect certain farm workers who may be at higher risk of infection. We're learning more about the dairy farm worker who came down with the avian flu. The worker suffered conjunctivitis with broken blood vessels in both eyes. The patient showed no other symptoms. Scientists believe it marks the first cow-to-human transmission of the virus to be reported worldwide. And some good news about the outbreak of H5N1 on dairy farms. North Carolina has lifted the quarantine of one dairy herd that had tested positive for the virus. That's after follow-up testing came back negative. The state says the herd was the only HPAI positive herd within the state. Officials say it was directly linked to a dairy herd in Texas that was clinically impacted by the virus. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture also reporting the state's poultry achieved HPAI-free status from the World Organization for Animal Health. That means the state can resume exports and international trade for poultry products to other countries. Also out of Texas, the state is releasing a report on what officials say sparked the deadly wildfires in the Texas Panhandle back in February. It says the largest of the fires, the Smokehouse Creek fire, was started by a decayed power pole that broke at ground level. That caused a power line on top of the pole to fall and come in contact with fine grassy fuels. The area at the time of seeing high temperatures, low humidity, and severe winds, it says the fire grew rapidly, moving at speeds of 6 to 8 miles per hour, growing to 95 miles and stretching into Oklahoma. It says more than 15,000 head of cattle were killed. Texas AgriLife estimates cattle losses to be valued at $27 million. Fencing losses were estimated at more than $68 million. It's reported several lawsuits have already been filed against 2 power companies and others by homeowners and ranchers. More severe weather swept the country this week. But what are the chances we'll see a break from all the rain? A check of your forecast is coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Maximize baleage yield with less time and effort with the LW1100 line wrap bale wrapper. You can wrap round or square bales, and the automatic operating mode allows for a one-person operation.
Time now for a check of weather. Meteorologist Matt Engelbrecht joining us this weekend. Matt, I know spring typically brings active and severe weather, but the number of tornadoes we're seeing almost daily, it seems more severe than we typically see in the spring.
As we look at the rainfall the next 7 days, the good news is the severe weather potential with this rainfall remains pretty low. Obviously not zero, but I'm not looking at a pattern setting up this week like what we had this past week, where it was nearly 7 to 8 days. Each day had a different spot across the United States that had the potential for severe weather. Rather, it's more about flooding concerns going into the weekend and next week, as a weak piece of energy is going to pick up that Gulf moisture and work from the west to the east. So that's where we could see some flooding in Louisiana and then all the way into Florida as it starts to work back up to the north and to the northeast. You can actually see 2 parts of that system. One is going to be that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, and then as the system exits up to the northeast, you see a trail of yellow through the northeast. So again, that's all part of kind of the same system as it works to the south and then back up to the north. Drying things out on the west coast, and that is kind of a signal for a ridge of high pressure trying to develop not only on the west coast but working to the east as we go into next week. So I wanted to show you the flooding potential coming up on Monday. That area that we just looked at, about a 15 to 40% chance, possibly some flooding in and across those Gulf Coast states. I notice that we don't get too far into Florida and Georgia and South Carolina on Monday, but by the time we hit into Tuesday, that may be a bit of a concern. As for that drought monitor, no drought where the heaviest rain is set to come down. Still looking at some drought conditions in through Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and then back down here to the south and the southwest. Now, New Mexico and Big Bend, Texas, down in that area, Midland, Odessa area, we are going to get some rain. We did this past weekend. May get another shot at some showers coming in to start the week. Otherwise, we dry out pretty quickly behind a ridge of high pressure most of next week. So your jet stream setup looks something like this. This is on Sunday. Now you got that trough leaving to the northeast, another weak trough trying to come through. We'll call this more of a short wave. If this was any deeper and there was cold air coming in on the other side of it, we'd be talking about more severe weather across the United States. That's not the case. It's a little too shallow for that situation. So really, it's more about showers being around rather than significant thunderstorms impacting America. Again, there's jet stream on Monday, Tuesday, and into Wednesday. This ridge of high pressure starts to build, so expect quiet conditions Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday into the weekend. That is what we're going to be watching for our next storm system next week.
Thanks, Matt. Well, severe weather in Brazil, that fueled the grain markets earlier this week, but we're also trying to digest the latest numbers in WASDE. Chip Nellinger and John Sheave help us do that next. Welcome back. John Sheave and Chip Nellinger joining us this weekend after a big Friday with USDA reports trying to initially digest what this information means. Chip, I'll start off with you because new crop corn carryover came in 180 million bushels below trade expectations. Was that the most bullish change that we saw in Friday's report?
Well, I think it might have been certainly on the one hand, old crop demand was 100 million bushels higher, and then they have new crop demand, higher as well. And so that ended up with a carryout figure that was well under the average estimate. I think that's certainly something that supports us going into the growing season here. We got to get the crop planted, and we got to make sure that we can get it pollinated and have that big crop and that chance at 181 bushel trendline yield.
John, you take a look at initially the report reaction. We were up on corn prices, soybean prices, wheat prices. Was this report that bullish?
I didn't see really anything in it that I thought was all that bullish from it. I thought it was more bearish than anything. I looked back at the May report a year ago to see what the initial thoughts were that this crop would turn out to be, and it was supposed to be 2.2 billion carryout. And at the time, December corn on 23 crop was trading at 515. It ends up that we come in now here at just over 2 billion on the carryout. And what we also saw was that the price that the USDA thought the farmer would get would be 480 would be their average price. Now they're already saying that that price is down to 465, and we're struggling to even maintain that value for cash for a lot of farmers across this country. So I don't see where this bullishness comes from, because this future report's still going to be over 2 billion, and that's assuming if we only plant 90 million acres.
Well, before we get more into the U.S. crop, looking at South America, we're still trying to assess the flooding impact there. Now, USDA, Chip, did make slight adjustments when it comes to that South America's crop, but that severe flooding, I mean, we're having some private estimates come in. Ag Resource Company, they estimated a loss of 1.32 million metric tons of soybeans there. Do you think we will see further cuts ahead?
Yeah, I really do. A lot of the private estimates are well under that. CONAB, we get Tuesday morning, so we'll get a fresh update from CONAB, and that will help kind of get the market a little bit of direction as to whether they continue to cut their estimates there. But a lot of local and private estimates in the Southern Hemisphere have crop sizes still several hundred million bushels below where the USDA is. A lot of recent flooding there, and there's be some crop loss in those southern areas of the Brazil growing areas. And so, I think that's part of it that's helping support us as well. And again, I think that a lot of this is money flow as well. We can't forget that the funds are in buy mode now. They're coming out of a large short position. And so this report, any of the numbers certainly didn't give the bears, a lot of ammunition when the funds are moving out of so many contracts on the short side and moving to the sidelines on a lot of these markets that we're trading.
John, do you have a similar take on South America? I know you watch it closely. I mean, you look at everyone trying to assess just how widespread of damage do we have right now, and it may take a while to do that.
I think it'll take us an extreme amount of time. The USDA always slow plays it about how they think that's going to be, and CONAB usually fast plays it and then backtracks it later on. So I think that between those two is probably where the real number is. It's probably closer to the USDA number. I don't think that a lot of the private analysts really have gotten how many acres are being planted down there. And the expansion is big. We saw that in the last year when everyone was a little bit shocked when the USDA wasn't lowering numbers. And that's because they were looking at export numbers coming out of there, and they saw that there's a lot of beans, which means a lot of extra acres went into the ground. So from that standpoint, I'm not expecting a lot more from that. And flooding is usually a very localized problem. It always seems worse than it really is. And so I don't put a lot of stock in it.
Well, the latest USDA report, all of the rain that we are seeing here in the U.S., had some good news when it comes to the Midwest. We will talk about that, plus the impact of the planting pace coming up next.
Watch Markets Now with Michelle Rook on the Farm Journal YouTube channel, keeping you updated throughout the day on the markets at the open, midday, and close. Find out what moved the markets today and what to expect the market to do next.
Welcome back. Well, Chip, the latest look at the drought monitor here in the U.S. shows nearly 75% of the Midwest is now drought-free. And as you look at the map, extreme drought now has been removed from Iowa. We have the lowest level of extreme drought in this country that we've seen since April of 2020. That's some great news. So as we look at some of these saturated soils, though, some planting delays, I mean, at this point, do we have any reason to believe that the 181 bushel per acre corn yield that USDA has penciled in right now for this year, that we won't hit that?
Well, a little bit in the back of my mind, we've never hit it before, right? If you use a 5-year average, of national average corn yield, it's several 5-6 bushels below where they have the trend line at 181. I think the longer it takes to plant this crop, the higher the bar is to hit 181, and that's something I think that's going to support us longer term. Is how do we get through June and July? And certainly we have a lot better moisture than we did before. That's a good thing to get this crop up and out of the ground, assuming we get the rest of it planted. But it doesn't mean you still can't have isolated, hot, dry weather. And heat, probably more than anything, is what we need to worry about. I think that was the salvation last year that gave us such a big crop, was we just didn't have the heat. And so the heat, probably as much as rainfall, is going to affect this crop in July and August when we pollinate and grain fill. And so there's still plenty of time for scares out there. And in my mind, 181, it's very doable, but we better get the crop in the ground a lot faster pace than we have the last 2 or 3 weeks here.
Yeah, we saw more rain this week, more rain in the forecast next week. John, is the market getting nervous at all about this planting pace?
Absolutely. If we look at where the market is in a 2 billion carryout, we should be at $4 corn. And so because of that, the market's already built 90 cents of weather premium into this. So I would be very concerned. And to Chip's point, yes, we've never grown 181, but if we go back and look at history since 1974, on average, 1 in 3 years, we end up setting a new record crop. And it's been, 5, 6 years since we've set, or I guess a couple years since we set the 177. We've had a couple there, but in general, we can attain it once every 3 years. Sometimes it happens a couple years in a row. So I would say there's a ton of weather premium in it, but if we don't have this crop, 3/4 planted within 2 weeks, yeah, then I think that the chances are 50% that we don't necessarily have to hit trendline yield.
Let's move over to wheat. We know that 35% of the U.S. wheat crop is still covered by abnormal dryness or drought. So we know that that crop is still battling dryness. But Chip, and we see 3 of Russia's key grain producing regions declare a state of emergency, citing May frosts that have caused severe damage to crops. So when it comes to this wheat market, what is really the headline that they're watching?
Yeah, I think the wheat's focused on Russia. Not only do they have a lot of dry weather in some of their main producing areas, they've had at least 1, if not 2 or 3 frosts and some cold weather, very cold weather in the forecast. In fact, earlier this week, I read that they had a snowfall in Moscow. So they are looking at an abnormally cold spring and an abnormally dry spring. I think that's the focus right now of the wheat market, is Russia. They've been the big wet blanket on the market because they're putting out huge supplies with a record crop a year ago, but that looks to change with this weather they're seeing. And it's really, again, to my point earlier, the fun money flow is driving it. They've had a big short position for the better part of 2 years, and they're coming out of that. And that means that maybe there's a little more upside, especially if Russian production stays, in question here going forward the next 2 or 3 weeks.
John, we needed something to excite this wheat market. And so do you think that this story has some legs?
I think it has ran its course. At this point, with the massive carry in the market, talking to mills, we were trying to get some cash wheat moved into some plans for a couple of producers that had old crop, and you have to wait to find an open slot time to dump. That is a concern to me, that you can't necessarily find the mills full. So if their flour sales are down, then which is kind of what we're hearing in the industry, I struggle to see why the wheat in general has to go higher.
John, Chip, so much insight this weekend. I really appreciate you both of us joining us. We need to take a quick break, and then we're checking in with Machinery Pete for Tractor Tales next.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. This week we're Kansas bound to check out a Farmall H that got to show off a little bit back in the day at the 1938 corn husking bee.
This Farmall H is a 1939 model. It was just when the styled tractors first came out. The interesting part about this tractor is we believe it to be, from all the information from the dealer and so on, that it's the first Farmall H tractor sold in Douglas County, Kansas. And the interesting thing is that it was used at the 1938, the fall of 1938, corn husking bee near Lawrence, Kansas. And this tractor was actually built in preparation for that in 1938. And so in the fall of 38, when the corn husking bee took place, International Harvester sent this tractor out to move wagons and to be on display at the corn husking bee near Lawrence, Kansas. And at that point in time, it was unique in that most of the tractors looked like the F-20s and so on, with no styling. This tractor has a very, very low serial number, the 524th tractor H tractor manufactured, and it was out on display. And then subsequent to that, the dealer was able to sell it, and my uncle actually bought this tractor, and he ended up giving it to me.
Thanks, Greg. From tornadoes to flooding to daily doses of rain keeping farmers out of the fields, it's been a wild spring. So what's causing it, and how much longer could this severe and wet weather stick around? That's our Farm Journal report after the break.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
There's no doubt we're seeing some crazy weather across the U.S. From flooding to tornadoes, severe weather is making headlines daily right now and setting records. So what's behind it all? According to meteorologists, the sudden transition from El Nino to La Nina is partially to blame, as we tell you this weekend in our Farm Journal report. Mother Nature continued to strike this week with more tornado outbreaks across the U.S. Reports of 3 tornadoes touching down in Michigan, a massive tornado tearing through Tennessee, and another hard-hit area, Oklahoma, with a mammoth tornado causing devastation in Barnesdall earlier this week. The active start to May is a continuation from late April.
And it turns out we saw approximately 380 tornadoes in the U.S. during the month of April. And if you look at all the years back to 1950, all the Aprils, this will rank as the number 2 all time. The only year we saw more U.S. tornadoes was the historic April 2011.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says that year the U.S. saw more than 800 tornadoes that month. But this year, the extremely active weather pattern is fueled by 3 factors.
Severe weather has a few requirements, and one is that there has to be cold air, there has to be warm and humid air, and you usually need a little twist in the atmosphere.
Drew Lerner of World Weather says it's been a few years since the atmosphere had such a contrast like we're seeing now.
We keep getting these colder air masses coming down from Canada. Some of them don't seem to be very significant at the surface, but they're there in aloft.
When you see that northeast track on Pacific Energy, that allows the Gulf and the Atlantic to open up with the moisture. It creates a pretty strong temperature gradient from northwest to southeast across the country. So that's factor number 1.
But another major factor is the transition from El Nino to La Nina.
When we do move very quickly from an El Nino to a La Nina, and that's what we're doing. We were, solidly in El Nino in January. We're supposed to be in La Nina by July. In those years, the atmosphere gets really confused because it's going out of a very persistent pattern and moving into one that is totally opposite.
Put all those factors together, and we have seen this near record-setting activity for severe weather in April continuing into early May.
That record-setting activity isn't just the number of tornadoes, but the amount of rain that's fallen since April 24th. Parts of Texas faced flooding over the weekend after 9 inches of rain fell in parts of the state in a span of 6 to 8 hours. All that rain is also sidelining planting across the U.S. The latest look at planting progress from USDA showed as of last Sunday, 36% of the country's corn crop was planted, 3 points behind average. The I states, Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa, all running slightly behind the 5-year average.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, getting into the middle to even the latter part of April, things were looking fantastic. We saw good progress on just about all major U.S. summer crops, including corn and soybeans. But things have really shut down.
But Lerner thinks that weather pattern will change in a couple weeks.
We're already seeing a pattern change in the second week of the outlook of sorts. We're going to get away from the extreme on the high volume end of the rainfall, but we're still going to keep weather systems moving through fairly quickly.
Rippey says more breaks of rain in the forecast will also open up more windows to plant.
This is not going to be a year like 2008 or 2019, where we have interminable delays that are related to wetness throughout the soil profile. This should dry out. We just need a few dry days, a few warm days, some wind, and things will get back to normal.
One thing I will point out, though, once we get beyond the first week of this forecast, we will start getting into some warmer weather. So as we get beyond mid-month, let's say, we'll start seeing a warmer bias to the temperatures, and that means a faster rate of drying between each of the storm systems that go through.
But that warmth and the sudden switch to La Nina are both unwelcome news for areas still battling drought.
Unfortunately, we continue to have this incredible gradient between the haves and the have-nots.
Areas of south central Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, and even Texas are still seeing drought.
And unfortunately, the outlooks that go into the summer and beyond indicate that we could most definitely see this persistence of that dry pattern, partly related to the transition to La Nina as we move into the heart of the growing season, summer and beyond.
Lerner says as La Nina brings a dry and warm bias to those areas, they're running out of time to see relief in the form of rain.
And as we move into late May and early June, we start building that ridge of high pressure up in the middle of the country. We will cut out that opportunity for rain again. And so it's going to be a short window of opportunity for improvement.
And that's a concern for everything from wheat, sorghum, and cotton to even irrigated corn.
Yeah, there are big concerns with the transition to La Nina looking forward. And a lot of the dynamical and statistical guidance certainly does suggest drier than normal conditions for the high plains through the heart of the summer.
Well, the transition from El Nino to La Nina isn't just impacting weather here in the U.S., it's also hitting South America. Parts of Brazil saw 12 to 24 inches of rain in just 10 days, causing catastrophic flooding. We'll talk about it in Ag Around the World next. Now for a glimpse of Ag Around the World. The flooding in southern Brazil isn't just impacting lives in the area's soybean crop, but also meat packers. It's reported torrential rains and flooding have killed livestock, blocked roads, and forced meat packers to partially or fully halt operations at 10 pork or poultry plants. The plants are located in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. The area could face a shortage of poultry and pork products until the production systems resume, which could take more than 30 days. The state accounts for 11% of Brazil's total chicken production and almost 20% of pork supplies. China's ag ministry continues to approve new genetically modified crop varieties in an attempt to boost food security. Just recently, the ministry approving a corn hybrid with both herbicide and insect resistant traits, as well as one gene edited variety that's higher yielding. But a possible bumper supply of soybeans from Argentina could further cut into U.S. soybean exports to China. Reuters says the U.S. made up less than a quarter of China's soybean imports last year. That compares to more than half in 2009. Meanwhile, China's soybean imports have nearly doubled over the last 15 years. Argentina is the #3 soybean grower after Brazil and the U.S., and it's forecasted to produce 50 million metric tons this year, more than double last year's output. And even though Brazil is expected to produce less this year, one trader says it will have ample supplies to meet the demands in China. That's it for a glimpse around the globe. Well, when we come back, finally some progress on the Farm Bill, but the fight is far from over. Jim Wiesmeyer peels back the curtain on what's happening in Washington in Chip's Corner next.
Chip's Corner on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Full Scale from Helena. Grow strong returns this season with breakthrough foliar nutrition from Full Scale at Reproduction.
Welcome back for Chip's Corner this weekend. Chip Flory is on the road, and so a regular guest on AgriTalk, Jim Wiesmeyer, joining us this weekend for Chip's Corner. Jim, we've been talking a lot about Farm Bill, especially considering last week we saw a first look from the House Ag Committee. We saw a first look from the Senate Ag Committee the same day. But is that normal? I mean, typically in previous farm bills, do you see these ag committees give a hint of what's to come, or do they just release the entire bill all at once?
They usually do it as a package near this, just shortly before the markup. Now, in this case of the House, they're going to have the markup May the 23rd. So it was almost like a teaser, if you will. They took out the best of, I guess, of what they were really trying to do. And I think the strategy on their part is because they wanted some Democrats on the House Ag Committee to see what they were up to, because frankly, the ranking member, Scott from Georgia, was not providing some of his fellow Democratic members on the panel with what the Republicans were talking about. So that's interesting in and of itself. And then the same day, we had a 94-page, not total text, from on the Senate side from Senate Ag Committee Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow. So that's political strategy there, where I think Stabenow is gunning to line up as many Democratic no votes for the Republican package that will come up again for a markup vote on May the 23rd.
Okay, you mentioned it, 94 pages. That takes a while to comb through. And I asked you, like, isn't there an AI tool to go through all of those pages? And I guess with you, I mean, it's experience. You want to see it for yourself, and that's exactly what you did.
Yes, it wasn't language, the traditional language. Some of it was language in the text. It was kind of, you could tell it was put out pretty fast. There were errors, there were typos in it, by the way. This on the Senate side, this is what you get when you try to accumulate 100 different bills into one package. So it wasn't as unified as the House Republican bill, which was very, I think, well thought out. And it's just not that I'm anti-Senate. It's just the Senate version tilts way towards food and nutrition, conservation, and climate change provisions, and that's clearly Stabenow's priorities. Where on the House side, I think it's indeed putting the farm back in the Farm Bill. It's has significant updates, reforms, if you will, for Title I. That's the safety net for agriculture, improvements in crop insurance, especially in the area-based program called SCO. By the time you're viewing this, late the previous week, there were all sorts of meetings going on. The Democrats were huddling together, including the ranking member on the House side, Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, was at the meeting with Democrats, and Stabenow was at that meeting. So I think they're formulating a push to be against the House Farm Bill. I have not seen that ever. To at least to that degree. G.T. Thompson, the House Ag Committee chairman, is met with Stabenow privately, and then he also met with a ranking member on the Senate side, John Bozeman, Republican from Arkansas, who, by the way, will put out a Senate alternative bill sometime after the House marks up their bill, Tyne. And I think it will look similar to some differences, but very similar to the House GOP farm plan. That's where we're at.
All right. Keep an eye out for that full analysis when the Farm Bill comes out from Jim Wiesmeyer. You can do that on profarmer.com. But we also launched Unscripted, a new Farm Journal podcast with Clinton Griffiths, myself, as well as Jim Wiesmeyer. He's the host this week. And we dig into a lot more details and a lot more tea about what went into this year's Farm Bill. You can check that out on Farm Journal's YouTube page. All right, we need to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. As the aid package for Ukraine's military leaves Washington, Illinois farmer and philanthropist Howard G. Buffett is working to help farmers and rural communities there survive and rebuild. In partnership with the German Marshall Fund, in April, Buffett traveled to Oklahoma City to meet with farm groups and city business leaders as part of his multi-state Whistle Stop tour for Ukraine. Farm Journal editor and host of Ag Day, Clinton Griffiths, takes us on that tour this weekend.
The motion to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 815 is agreed to.
When our allies are stronger, we are stronger.
As President Biden signs the latest aid package for Ukraine, the war stretches into another month. With spring planting arriving, farmers there are struggling to maintain production, infrastructure, and markets.
As a farmer, when I travel across Ukraine and meet with farmers and go to farms, it's pretty amazing to see the devastation.
Howard G. Buffett has traveled to Ukraine on 11 different occasions to see for himself the challenges facing farmers in the region.
Keeping, fertilizer moving and seeds moving and chemicals moving and even parts for tractors and combines. I mean, that value chain has to stay in place and be able to operate. And I think it's got more and more stress on it today than it did, even last year.
At last count, more than 85,000 pieces of farm equipment have been destroyed, and the State Emergency Service of Ukraine now says 25% of the nation's total landmass may contain explosives.
Landmines are a significant issue across the country in terms of affecting agriculture, and of course that affects the economy.
During the conversation with agricultural leaders in Oklahoma, Buffett shared his view from the front lines.
One of the things that is kind of disheartening to me as a farmer is if you look at the occupied areas that Russia has in Ukraine, this last year it was estimated that almost 28% of the wheat production in Ukraine came from those occupied areas. So you have Russia using farmers in those areas to actually fund the war against Ukraine, which is pretty hard to imagine, but it's happening.
That wheat coming from Russia and Ukraine is an area of concern for Oklahoma wheat farmers in the room.
If you look at the export numbers from the Ukraine area, there's still a lot of wheat being shipped out of that area. So from your standpoint, do you feel that's just grain they have in storage from previous years that's being shipped out, or do you think there's still a lot of wheat production going on in that country?
I've been pretty shocked at the amount of wheat they've been able to ship out. Ukraine is probably selling grain at below the cost of production right now, and they're doing it because they have no choice.
Their cheap grain is putting us at an extreme disadvantage because their grain is competing against us.
You know, people are simply trying to survive, and that's what they're trying to do.
It was really enlightening for me to be, as an Oklahoma leader, to come to this meeting and hear what Mr. Buffett had to say. And I don't get in my tractor to go plow the ground to worry about a landmine. These people have bigger problems.
I think the takeaway today is it's eye-opening to actually be able to talk to somebody that's had boots on the ground, been there in person, talking with the farmers, individuals over in Ukraine, and seeing the things they go through.
As the war continues, the financial and logistical hardships are putting millions of farm families and businesses at risk.
Ukraine can't give up. Ukraine doesn't have an option. I mean, Ukraine is fighting for their freedom, but they're also fighting for their lives.
As the U.S. sends additional military aid, the Howard G. Buffett Foundation has given nearly $600 million in food, support, and equipment.
It's one of the few times, well, it's the only time, I would say, in my life that I had to decide, are we going to step up? And if we step up, then we have to step up big.
We all have a cause. What's your cause? What's my cause? This is his cause. But what's your passion and what are you doing? And so, to me, that maybe brings it to a little more home.
From room to room, city by city, it's a message from the front lines where the view of the war's real cost hits home.
If you want Ukraine to win, we have to give them what they need to win. We've given them enough to fight and die, but not enough to fight and win.
Thank you for that look, Clinton. Well, it's not often you hear of dairy farmers landing a spot on Forbes 30 Under 30, but it's a special dairy farm in Pennsylvania that's done just that. We'll introduce you to two sisters, and from the farm next. Well, it's not often you hear of dairy farmers and their businesses being recognized by Forbes magazine. But for two sisters in Pennsylvania, they've found spectacular success with their organic yogurt, and it landed them a spot on Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Located in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, Painterland Sisters Icelandic yogurt is truly a dream come true. They were a guest this week on Farm Journal's new podcast called Grow Getters, which is hosted by Davis Michelson. The sisters are now the fourth generation on their farm's dairy, which consists of 400 cows of all different breeds. They both worked off the farm first, but when they came home, they had big dreams and big plans, deciding to build an entire processing plant.
We went to a ton of different cheese plants, dairy plants, started with a dairy equipment provider, really focused on what we were going to buy. And then that was about a year and a half of working on a business plan, 120 pages.
Wow.
To figure that out, about to present to the bank. And then we realized that we have this $10 million dairy processing facility, and that's going to utilize all of our milk's going to go through that, right? So we could take control of our own destiny. And then we realized, oh my gosh, where are we going to sell the end product?
But that's when they decided to partner with co-packer in Pennsylvania to market their products across the U.S. And it worked. Get this. The sisters sold their first cup of yogurt in March of 2022. And by March of 2024, their yogurt was already in 200 different stores across all 50 states, including Whole Foods. And that growth fueled their decision to apply for Forbes 30 Under 30 list.
We saw really cool, powerful women that were helping their families' businesses on the Forbes 30 Under 30. And so my sister and I looked at each other, we're like, we want to do that. We want to represent dairy farming, right? Agriculture in Forbes 30 Under 30. Like, wouldn't that be amazing to make it relatable and make dairy cool and fun to the general consumer? And so that's what 30 Under 30 really means to Haley and I, that, hey, like, we're making dairy farming mainstream.
You can hear more of the Painterland sisters' incredible story on Farm Journal's Grow Getters podcast, now on the Farm Journal YouTube page. Make sure that you subscribe for the most up-to-date episodes on that. That's also where you can find Unscripted, so make sure to check both of those out this weekend. Well, that does it for U.S. Farm Report this Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all of you out there. Be sure to join us again next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.